What a program I have for you today. The fact checkers have been really going through Dick Cheney's claims that he made during his recent torture interviews. And I guess we can call them torture interviews because essentially Dick Cheney just went around both denying that any torture took place and that the torture worked. Both comments that are completely at odds with the actual Senate torture report. And of course, this probably wouldn't surprise you if you're a clear thinking and logical individual, but a lot of what Dick Cheney said just was not true. Let's go through a couple of the different claims and you will quickly see that it was really just a very poor attempt at a pro-torture kind of apology from Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney made the claim that terrorists were not covered by the Geneva Convention, okay? This is mostly false. As PolitiFact has uncovered, his comment completely ignores the fact that unlawful combatants are still accorded a minimum degree of protection, including a ban on violence to life and person, in particular, murder of all kinds, mutilation, cruel treatment, and torture, and outrages upon personal dignity, in particular, humiliating and degrading treatment. This has been validated and upheld by the Supreme Court. And how could anyone look at that torture report and say that the detainees were not subjected to humiliating and degrading treatment, to violence against their lives and persons, etc., etc., a just blatant lie from the former vice president. Cheney also claimed that Saddam Hussein had a decade-long tie to Al-Qaeda. This is entirely false. Entirely false is the designation from Pundit Cat. Quote, two comprehensive high-level government reports largely refute that statement. That includes one Pentagon study that relied on a trove of secret Iraqi government documents that fell into American hands after the invasion. Just no evidence at all that such a relationship between Saddam and Al-Qaeda existed. Not that much of our audience needed a reminder about that. And third, Dick Cheney also refuted an argument that came from Chuck Todd. And Chuck Todd said what I've been saying to guests for weeks and what seems to be completely true, which is, how do we not call waterboarding torture now, but we called it waterboarding when we prosecuted the Japanese for doing it to our soldiers in World War II? And Dick Cheney said that that's not true, that we actually went after the Japanese for worse atrocities, and it just so happened they had also engaged in waterboarding. Completely incorrect. Washington Post's fact checker Glenn Kessler gave that argument 3 Pinocchios out of 4, saying that it's just not true. And he says Cheney dismissed too cavalierly Todd's question about the prosecution of Japanese soldiers for waterboarding. One could quibble about whether these practices were exactly like the version of waterboarding practiced by CIA interrogators, but it was a legitimate question, and contrary to Dick Cheney's assertion, waterboarding was an important charge in a number of the lesser profile cases. Anybody surprised by this? What we should really be talking about is not that Dick Cheney lied his way through these interviews, because that was obvious to most people who have been paying any attention at all, but why didn't the interviewees question them? I mean, I guess when it's Chuck Todd and Fox News, maybe we shouldn't have that high of an expectation set there. But anybody could have predicted that these would be Cheney's answers. Just doing basic research to prepare yourself for the interview would tell you this is likely how Dick Cheney would respond, and no counter arguments whatsoever about the specifics. Just some slightly, I guess, adversarial questions that were the objections were dropped quite quickly when Dick Cheney tried to refute them. Lies from Dick Cheney.